Describe the transformations that produce the graphs of f and g from the graph of f. So you start with 1 over x. You have this plus 2 with the x. It's on the bottom with the x. If it were like that, the plus 2 not on the bottom, you could think of it with a y. So it's with the x. So if it's with the x, that means either right or left movement. And that would be left 2. Minus 3 with the x. So that is right 3. X cubed. Let's describe that transformation. We start with x cubed. The minus 2 with the x would move it right 2. The plus 1, it's not with the x because I could easily subtract 1 from each side and move it over the g of x. So this would be up 1. You can think of it with the y or the g of x. For b, the first thing I have is a negative in front. That negative is not with the x because, let me show you why. If I have an x cubed, that negative is in front. I can easily divide by a negative 1 and move it on the h of x side. So it's not with the x, it's with a y. So the y is changing signs from positive to negative. So that's a rotation around the x axis because my y is changing signs. And then the plus 1 would be left 1, and the plus 2 would be up 2. The next transformation, let me rewrite this as 2 times the cube root of negative x minus 1 plus 4. So if I write it that way, it's really the same thing. Distribute the negative, and then you'd have negative x plus 1, which is the same thing as 1 minus x. So now I rewrote it. So now that negative is with the x. So my y is changing signs. Or the x, I'm sorry, the x is changing signs. So it's around the y axis. My x is going from positive to negative. My x goes from positive to negative. It's a rotation around the y, around R-O-U-N, around the y axis. Minus 1 with the x is right or left movement, and that would be right 1. The plus 4 would be up 4. This 2 would stretch vertically by a factor of 2. So it's around the y-axis, stretch vertically by a factor of 2, 1 to the right, and 4 up. B. Now, if I have my cube root, this negative now is in front of it, so it's with the y. So this is around the x-axis, so it's around the x-axis. The minus 1 is to the right 1. The plus 3 is up 3. Graph each function by starting with a function from the library of functions and then using the techniques of shifting, compressing, stretching, and or reflecting. So what we're thinking about is starting with x squared, which is a parabola. It's a parabola that opens up. There's a point 1, 1, negative 1, 1, 0, 0, 2, 4, 3, 9, negative 2, 4, negative 3, 9. And that's what the parabola would look like if I connected it. The minus, my y is changing signs. So now you can think of the parabola opening down with a vertex of 0, 0. The plus 3 is left 3. The 2 is up 2. So now the negative is a parabola that opens down, and then I move it to the right 3, up 2. And so there's my new vertex, about right there. There's that, 2, 4, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whoops, sorry, 9. There, not up there. Like that. And right there. So it looks something like this right here. That's what the new parabola looks like. Next one. So remember what the square root of x. 0, 0, there's a point. At 1, 1, there's a point. At 4, 2, there's a point. At 9, 3, there's a point. So that's about what the parabola looks like if I connected it. Okay? So let me write some of these points. That might help you. 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 4, 2, 9, 3. So there are some points there. The minus 2, it stretches it vertically by a factor of 2. So now my y, vertically, my y is changing signs by a factor of 2. So this y is changing by a factor of 2. So what that does is this point becomes 0, 0, it stays 0, 0. This one, x stays the same, the y changes by a factor of 2. X stays the same, y changes by a factor of 2. This point, the 9 stays the same, factor of 2. So that's what the 2 does. The minus is my y changing signs to positive and negative. So my y, instead of being positive now, is negative. So this is negative, negative, negative. And then the minus 1 would move it right 1. That's an x direction. So this x, I would add 1 to it. So now my new points would be 1, 0, 2, negative 2, 5, negative 4, and 10, negative 6. So there are my new points. So I have a point at 1, 0. Change it to red. So I have a point at 1, 0. I have a point at 2, negative 2. 3, 4, 5, negative 4. 10, negative 6. So it looks something like this right here. Next graph. Write an equation for the function whose graph fits the description. We start with an x squared. We're going to shift it left 2, and we're going to reflect it about the x-axis. So around the x-axis, x is changing signs from positive to negative. So this x squared becomes negative x squared. That's the reflection. And then the shifting it to the left 2 would be a plus 2. If it were right 2, it would be minus 2. Next one, the graph of the square root of x is going to shift down 2 units, reflect about the x-axis, compress vertically by a factor of 1/2. So I start start with the square root of x. I'm going to reflect it about the x-axis. So if it goes around the x-axis, my y is changing signs. So there I have a negative. That's reflecting around the x-axis. My y is changing signs. Vertical compression by a factor of a half would be 1/2 in front of there. And then 2 units down would be minus 2. So I'm taking it and I'm shifting it down 2 units. I'm reflecting it about the x-axis and I'm compressing it vertically by a factor of 1/2. The next one, graph the function of y is equal to g of x given the function below, the graph that we have below the words there. So instead of f of x, I'm going to do f of x plus 3. That means I'm going to go up 3. If I go up 3, my y is changing by 3 units. I'm going to add 3 to my y's. So instead of being at negative 3, 1, I'm at negative 3, 4. Instead of being at negative 1, 3, I'm at negative 1, 6. And instead of being at 4, 5, I'm at 4, 8. So it's negative 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's the point right there. Negative 1, 6 is right there. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, which is right there. So the graph looks similar to that. G of x is equal to 1/2 f of x. So here I am compressing it by a factor of 1/2. Here my y is changing signs by a factor of 1/2. So my x stays the same, my y is cut in half. So instead of negative 3, 1, it's negative 3 1/2. Instead of it's negative 3 or negative 1, 3, it's negative 1, 3 halves. Instead of it being 4, 5, it's 4, 5 halves. So negative 3 1/2, negative 1, 3 halves, and 4, 5 halves. So that's 2 1/2 right there. So it looks something like this right here. Next, let's start with the f of negative 2x. My x is changing signs. X is changing signs, so this is around the y-axis. And remember, the 2 in front of the x is a compression, horizontal compression. So my new x, instead of being negative 3, my y is going to keep the same. Instead of it being negative 3, it's negative 3 divided by negative 2. Around the y-axis, x is changing signs, so the negative 3 gets to be a positive 3, and then now it's 3 halves. The negative 1, the negative becomes positive 1 divided by 2, which is 1/2. The 4 becomes a negative 4 divided by 2. So that's your compression there. The negative in front of the f of x, or in front of the f, is my y changing signs. So my y changes signs. So there's my y changing signs. That's that negative in front of there. And then the plus 1 would be down 1. So wherever there's a y, then I will subtract 1 from the y. That's from y. So now my points will be 3 halves, hard to read, 3 halves, comma, subtract 1 from the y, so it's -2. 1 half, subtract 1 from the y, so now it's -4. Negative 4 halves, so negative 4 halves is -2, comma, -5, subtract 1, would be -6. So 0 are my new points. So I'm at 3 halves, -2. I'm at 1 half, -4. And I'm at -2, -6, which is right there. So it's something like that graph right there. Next graph, -2 in front of the f of x. -2, the negative changes my y from positive to negative. So my y is changing signs from positive to negative. My y is changing signs from positive to negative. And then it stretches by a factor of 2. So then I'm going to multiply by the 2. So I'm going to change the sign of y and then multiply it by 2. So a -4, -2 becomes -4, change the sign to +2, multiply by 2 is 4. The next point, 1, 2 becomes -4. The point 3, -1 becomes 3, 2. And the point 5, 4 becomes 5, -8. So let's graph those. -4, 4. +1, -4. It's right about there. 3, 2. It's right there. 5, -8, which is right there. So now this graph becomes something like this. So it rotates it around the axis. So my y is changing signs from positive to negative around the x-axis. And then it stretched it by a factor of 2. Let's try another one. This will be the last example. I'm going to rewrite the problem. Negative f, negative x. Oops. Hold on. Let me rewrite it again. Okay. So I have negative f of negative in front of the x, see a negative there, x minus 1. Can you see that this is negative x plus 1 minus 2? Okay, it's a 2 there. So let's see what that function does. I guess I need some bigger parentheses around it. Negative. The negative in front of the f. That's around the y-axis. My x is changing signs, or my y is changing signs from positive to negative. So this is around the x-axis. The negative in front of the x is the x changing sign, so that's around the y-axis. So my x's and y's change signs. So let me just start right there. So my points become, instead of -4, -2, 4, 2. 1, 2 becomes -1, -2. 3, -1 becomes -3, +1. And 5, 4 becomes -5, -4. So there's my negatives in front of the F, that's the Y changing signs, and in front of the X changing sign. The minus 1 right there would be to the right 1. So I am going to add 1 to my X value. And the minus 2 there is down 2. So I'm going to add a negative 2, or subtract 2, from my Y value. So I'm going to add 1 to the X, subtract 2 from the Y. So now my new points become, write them in red now, my 4, I'm going to add 1 to my X. Let me just do my X's first. So 5, 0, negative 2, negative 4. So those are my X's. My Y, subtract 2, so it's 0, negative 4, negative 1, negative 6. So my new points are 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0. Puts me right about there. And then 0, negative 4. Puts me right there. Negative 2, negative 1. And negative 4, negative 6. Puts me right there. So there is my graph. I rotated it around the x-axis. I rotated it around the y-axis. And then after that, what I did is I moved it to the right 1, and I moved it down 2.